G'day, I'm Martin Beanland from Sydney metropolitan area. I'm a mortgage broker and I'm keen to share with you a few things that the banks aren't going to tell you, the broker groups aren't going to tell you, and as a consumer, as an Australian punter who has a home loan, I really want to share with you, and I think it's really important you understand some of the dynamics at play here in the Royal Commission, and particularly outcomes to brokers and the consumer. This one I want to start with is, I'll go some facts, not some of the hot press that's been going on. There's been some crazy stuff being talked about, and there's some self-interested groups that are really get up my nose this week. So let's start with this one. Net interest margins. When I started as a broker, here's me here, 2002. Net interest margins by banks, that's the difference between the cash rate and the delivery rate, the home loan rate, was about 4%. So the punters, going mostly to major banks, the major banks had about 80% market share at that time, and the punters, their rates were up. And this could happen again if the broker market doesn't get to support and protect their consumers. Through the strength of the broker market in the early 2000s, mid-2000s, it then settled into about 2 to 2.5%. I didn't find a stat more recent, but I don't have 100 PR people and millions of dollars to put on this display, which is pretty clear. Next slide I want to show you is who earns what. This will kind of stun you. We don't quite get the bottom of the chart there. I might have to get my barrel guy, Shane, to do something here. But I'm just going to run through some stats here with you. It's kind of funny because there's the broker commission down the bottom. Cash rate 1.5%. I'm going to use the example of home loan rate 4% and the margin, therefore, 2.5%. So that's the cost of delivery of funds. It might be 2, it might be 2.5. In terms of, let's say a home loan of $400,000. And therefore, if the broker earns, on the left here, an upfront of 0.65, it's pretty common and standard across the groups, 0.65, and a trail, which is actually a deferred upfront. In the early 90s, when broker commissions were agreed with banks, it was agreed they couldn't pay the full commission up front, so they paid an upfront commission of 0.65-ish, and they paid a deferred commission over 4 years, the expected loan life. So essentially the upfront was paid in two parts. So the broker earns, say, $2,600 up front, say $2,400 over the next average 4 years, some less, some more, $5,000. That's what the broker earns. And that's this little graph down the bottom here. So there's the upfront and the deferred upfront. So what's going on over at the bank? Now, we need a strong banking system. I know they have strong infrastructure and it's very important for our country. Let's not get me wrong here, but in the first year, the difference between the broker commission and the margin is 1.85%. So the upfront for the bank, if you like, is $7,400. The trail or deferred upfront, so they get a trail as well. They get ongoing commission. They get 2.5% delivery rate, pay 0.15, 2.35 is their delivery, their trail, if you like. Yeah, we'll call it their trail. And that works out to 7.4 plus 37.6, $45,000. There you go. That's pretty much what's at play here. So there's graphically the bank commission versus the broker commission, and that's to scale. I carefully measured it. Kind of crazy. The next thing I want to share with you is who earns what at the ground level. So let's look first at a banker. So a banker at a lender, they usually do a good job, and their starting salary is around $90,000. That's PAYG salary, no cost. Of course, the bank will look after all that. So $90,000 is their PAYG. Okay, and good ones get 120 grand. That's pretty solid. 150 grand is going market for a fairly competitive, good banker. And there is one major bank at the moment very aggressively recruiting to grow their lending managers for expected growth, I would assume. Another banker told me they were struggling to hold their bankers because of this aggressive practice by that one lender. So what's a broker earn? The numbers in the Royal Commission sort of said, yeah, great. The average upfront of a broker, $76,000 a year. The deferred upfront, or call it trail, $57,000 a year, $133,000. Oh, hang on. That's not income. That's gross revenue. So what does an average broker earn? Well, this is a bit that the broker groups don't want to tell you, because who knows what it is. I've never seen a stat. I've had lots of broker CEOs tell me, oh mate, I'm not going to tell you that, and I really don't want to tell you that because I don't want to hose down people who want to have a dream of being a broker. I've been a business coach in a broking group, and I would say it's give or take $60,000. I might be a little bit generous on that. There are brokers that make outstanding money, but they're not that many of them. if you look down at this stat down the bottom, it's quite broad. So it's hard to read, don't worry about it. But over here, you've got brokers writing not much volume at all. So there's a pretty statistical amount. There's like 40 or 50% of brokers that are under, say, $5 million settled per year. This middle is this sort of engine room that's kind of due in the range of, 600,000 to $1 million per month. Here's where I am over here, this point right here. So my team does about 30 million per year, a bit over. The last 3 years I've been 32, 34. And the elite level, the top 3% of brokers write in excess of 50 million per year. So they would be earning excellent income, but they're making big sacrifices personally and in their business, and have big infrastructure, and they're employing many people. So I employ 2 people, and so I'm a self-employed person who pays all of the outgoings and costs. I do not earn in excess of, I don't earn $90,000. I did not earn $90,000 last year. It was less. So I've been in a startup phase investing. However, I would aspire to earn more, and I expect I'll earn more if I'm given a fair go. All right, so let's move on to the next one I got here. Let's look at broker market share. Again, my very expensive graphics. When I started as a broker, 2002, it was somewhere here. I don't have a stat, didn't see a stat. 20 or 25% was the percentage of consumers that went to a broker. Over time, it pretty steadily rose, and look at my very good graph here. 2018, the most recent number, is 59% of Australian consumers choose a mortgage broker over going to a bank direct. The punter is telling us that's what they want. That's an extraordinary stat. Net promoter scores within broker groups are 80 to 90, a Harvard accepted model. Net promoter scores in regional banks are around 20, in major banks minus 10. Minus 10. So now that's across the board, a lot of banking practices and stuff, but I believe the consumers are telling us they want to work with brokers. And the bottom line, what we do is we look at options for them. We look at where can you find a deal. Lending practices are so different everywhere. We reckon in our office 30% of deals come to us having been declined or told no somewhere else. And we reckon up to half of the deals that we write would be a fail or a decline somewhere. So if a punter walks into a lender, you're taking a chance. If you get a no, consumer, please don't take it as a no, take it as a no at this door. Get someone to help you, or good luck in finding the right door. If the broker market's not sustainable, then you have to do that yourself, or maybe the rich can pay for it. I'm not sure. So here's my actual stats. I have around 45% with major banks. If you count St George in the Westpac group, it's closer to 60-65%. They've had excellent features, specials, pricing. I haven't been as heavy on St George in the last year. This is the competitive marketplace. Banks are competing based on their service, based on their product, based on their lending rules, and the consumer experience. Now, the Royal Commissioner talked about let's squash the sales culture in banking. Well, I reckon let's have more of it. If you're going to compete on those aspects in a professional way, and we're going to keep the margins down, and banks are going to compete on product and price and service, then that sales culture is cool with me. Now, there's practices that are wrong and inappropriate. I'll talk about those in a sec. But yeah, we're proud of the fact we have a strong lender spread. We've had 17 residential lenders we've used in 3 years. Yes, we heavily have maybe 80%, 80-20. So 80% might be about the top 8 or 9 or something like that. Okay, so let's move on to, I just want to talk a little about the compliance world. So there's been a lot of change already. The Royal Commission made some outstanding recommendations, but many of these are already done. Cedric Review talked about paid on net balance and not on undrawn funds. There's been very strong compliance crackdowns in lenders and in broker groups. The requirement to heavily and carefully assess, fully looking at all statements, someone's cost of living, which ridiculously till the last year or so was not required. The requirement by lenders to be compliant with their own lending policies. Lending has got much tighter. And because of this, it's even more important the consumer gets an option to get great support in getting their loans. So a lot of change has already happened. A lot of people screaming for change, particularly in broker groups. we've already had a lot of change, and it's welcomed. It's really important that we... another one's disclosure of commissions. Like, that comes up as a little shot in the nose every now and then. Well, commissions have been required by law to be disclosed for a very long time. So there's a lot of cheap shots in the marketplace and the press, and I'm pretty cranky about it if you can't tell. Righto, so there's been a lot of change already. Last thing, we're getting close to the end, is the government approach. Now, I don't want to make this about... one more, mate, back one. I don't want to make this about a government or a opposition or a position, but both parts of government are currently kind of, to me, pretty reckless in saying, let's just implement the lot, or let's just get rid of upfront. Oh, sorry, upfront. Let's get rid of trial. Let's move to an upfront regime of the customer pays. Like, if the broker industry is not sustainable and not viable, self-employed small businesses will fail, will close, I will close, and try and find another job. I'd be really disappointed, because I'm very passionate about being a consumer advocate, and that's just totally counter to the Royal Commission intent. So the Royal Commission is saying, get rid of that nasty trail. Well, to me, it's part of the upfront deferred commission, and it's not unreasonable. Brokers don't make a bomb of money. The other part of the Royal Commission finding in regards brokers is, let's make the consumer pay, or let's investigate making the consumer pay. Well, surveys have shown they won't. They do not want to pay, and only a very small percentage, like 4% in the last survey I saw, would pay like $2,000. So that's just not viable. And if you add it on to the loan, I'll let the consumer pay, but add on the loan, we'll just add it on to that number I showed you before of what the bank's already earning. Like, that's outrageous. So there's not a mature discussion and debate that goes into detail of strategies, and that's what I'd love to see. I'm very passionate about what I do, and I'm also confident and hopeful that our industry leaders are going to take us that way. The Royal Commission was a weird bird. You had to be invited to go to the Royal Commission. There was one broker, I believe, spoke to the Royal Commission. Where did he work? He worked in a CBA-owned or part-owned organisation. There was a lot of CEOs from banks talking. There was others talking. There was, of course, importantly, victims and people have been aggrieved. Fantastic and important that they have their story told and get appropriate outcomes for the people that were involved. But were the Mortgage Association representative bodies involved? Well, no. The MFAA and the FBAA did not come or get asked to speak. The top 5 broker groups are owned by, or part owned by, guess who? Banks. Now, if you didn't know that, you need to as a punter and consumer. That's quite outrageous. The biggest broker group not owned by a bank is Loan Market, and Sam White was offering and willing, and he's a very balanced and reasonable and respected industry leader. He was not invited to talk to the Royal Commission. There's many respected pundits and commentators, people like Switzer, Margaret Lomas of Financial Review, talking about oligopoly coming back, talking about banks commit fraud, brokers get bashed. I think we've just got to realign what the outcomes were versus the intent of the Royal Commission. The intent of the Royal Commission, the intent of the Commission are fabulous. I think there's some work to do on the outcomes and fair models that represent the consumer. So my last page, and I'm sorry it's gone so long, but please share it if you think this is a message worth sharing. Talk about shares, share prices yesterday, ridiculous. Royal Commission, fraud, corruption, outrageous comments, outrageous actions, and CEOs that are just doing unbelievable things and flying in the face of the consumer. Banks up 4 to 6%, broker groups down 24 to 29%. Like, go figure. They're the consumer advocates. They're the consumer mentors and supporters. I just want everyone to get behind it and spread the truth, spread the facts. And I'm very confident about the viability of the industry. And thanks for listening. All the best. See ya.